Thank you. So good afternoon. My name is Erin Shannon, and I am the Director of Small Business for the Washington Policy Center. Thank you for joining us today at the Small Business panel, is Right to Work, Right for Washington. And before we begin our discussion, I want to recognize one of our co-presenter of this Small Business panel, Tridec and Kayla Pratt. So thank you, Kayla and Tridec. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Small Business Center, in the work that we do, our mission is to research, analyze, and promote public policies that will improve our state's small business climate. Over the years, Washington Policy Center has recommended policies to reform our state's broken workers' compensation system, replace the unfair B&O tax, and reduce the regulatory burden on small businesses in our state. And if you look in your folders or want to learn more, there's a copy of a research study we did earlier this year, Job Creators and Job Killers, and it's just a shortened version of a very long analysis we did of some of the bills that were considered this past legislative session, and we've lumped them into two categories, Job Killers and Job Creators. And it's a good snapshot of kind of what's happening in our state and where lawmakers are on some of these very important issues. So the center's mission to promote policies that will make our state more competitive brings us to the question today, is right to work right for Washington? As more and more states are becoming right to work states, the latest being the historically union stronghold of Michigan, it seems right to work is gaining traction. On CNBC's annual list of the best states to do business, 9 of the top 10 states are right-to-work states. Automobile manufacturers are opting to build their plants in right-to-work states like Alabama and Tennessee. And in our own state, Boeing has begun shifting jobs from Puget Sound to the right-to-work state of South Carolina. So again, in today's panel, we are going to ask, is right to work right for Washington State? And we're going to hear from 3 wonderful experts on this issue. And I'd like to go ahead and start by introducing Dr. Eric Fruits. Dr. Fruits is the president of Economics International Corp, an Oregon-based consulting firm specializing in economics, finance, and statistics. And in his spare time, he's an adjunct professor at Portland State University. A recognized expert in his field, Dr. Fruits analyzes the economic and fiscal impacts of business activities and government policies. He recently published a comprehensive and very well-researched analysis of the impact a right-to-work policy would have in Oregon. So today, Dr. Fruits is going to share some of his research on what his studies reveal about right to work. So please welcome Dr. Fruits.
Thank you. Well, thanks for having me here. As part of my part-time job, I'm also an adjunct professor, which means I am also I pay dues to the American Federation of Teachers. So I'm not a union member, but I do pay dues, which kind of raises the point about what is right to work. I think most people here probably know what I'm talking about, but I'll act like you don't. In some cases, states that are not right to work states, what happens is you come in and you look for a job, and they say, okay, great, you're hired. But as a condition of you working in this job, you have to join the union, and if you decide not to join the union, you still have to pay the union dues. That's what's known as the fair share payment. And so what right to work does, right to work is a state level law that says that employers are not allowed to enter into those sorts of agreements with unions where being a member of the union or paying union dues is a condition of your employment. And so that's why it's called right to work. You have the right to work without necessarily joining the union. And it seems to me like it's something that should be fairly uncontroversial, but it's a huge deal. And as soon as you mention right to work, I'm surprised I haven't seen the pitchforks and torches yet. We had a conversation a few months ago sponsored by Cascade Policy Institute down in Vancouver, Washington. And a bunch of union guys came in and started protesting and spit on one of the presenters on right to work. It's a big deal, really contentious. And Senator Baumgartner is very brave to be here, so I appreciate him being here. So that's just kind of the basics of what right to work is. And I'm an economist, and so I've heard that a sure way to ruin a party is to invite an economist. So I'll make sure that I'm done sometime before noon here. first thing is, and these are going to be really simple slides. I'm just going to tell you, first of all, employment growth is double in right-to-work states. In other words, if you look over the long haul, employment growth in right-to-work states has been roughly double the rate of non-right-to-work states. And that's a picture from North Dakota, people working on a back-in-field oil rig. A lot of those states are right-to-work states, and it also reflects the energy boom. Plus, it's hard to find good pictures of people working without making them look too sad. I'm going to just blow through these really quick because they're really kind of scattered and ugly. But what I wanted to show you here is if you look at, I call them forced unionization states. In other words, these are states that are not right to work. You've got roughly 1.3% annual employment growth a year, and that's okay. That's pretty good. But if you looked at right-to-work states, it's roughly 2.6% a year. And I'm going to flip back and forth. You can kind of see the difference. Right-to-work, forced unionization has a much lower trend. Right-to-work has a much higher trend. But the problem with those pictures is they're ugly and only an economist would appreciate them. That's the picture that you want to see. And I should just be done right now. It's the power of 1%. If you look over time, this sort of growth is just phenomenal. 1% sounds like nothing, but it's a huge amount when you build it over time. 1950 to today, that's 72 years. That's a huge amount of time that got to, that you've had those sorts of gains really blossom. Another thing to keep in mind, too, and we'll get to this in a second, is a lot of times what you'll hear as well, these right-to-work states that are growing, they're like in the South, where you've had Mercedes and BMW put their new plants, and their employment was so low. But you got to also remember, think about what the South looked like in the 1950s and 60s. This was Jim Crow. This was pre-civil rights era. You had some pretty nasty work environments. This was not a place where you would expect to see employment growth, but things changed. And what you had was these states adopting pro-business strategies. And this is great that you have states employing these pro-growth business strategies, but it's also a problem from an economist, because when you go back and you say, well, gee, we had that 2.6% growth per year in the right-to-work states. Well, remember, there's a lot of other things going on. You also have, these states tend to have lower taxes. They tend to have looser regulations, in addition to being right to work. A big thing that people who hate right to work like to point out is that they've got more sunshine. They seem to think that there's some sort of magic in sunshine, that that we're all like moths and we're just attracted to the sunshine. And that's the thing that really draws people to these southern states, and right to work states. Has nothing to do with policies.
You don't live in Seattle, do you?
I live in Portland. And, Portland, we attract a bunch of people, but I think it has something to do with all the microbreweries and strip clubs. We don't have the marijuana yet, but you just have to go across the river for that. So the point I want to make here is that you have these pro-growth business policies that go hand in hand with right to work. And so that's great. Problem is then you can't really say all of that 2.6% is due to right to work. And so that's where the statistical analysis comes in as an economist. And so what I did was I teased out, I looked at things like the tax rates. I looked at what region of the country they're in, and that kind of accounted for things like the weather. I looked at educational levels, because states that have more people with bachelor's degrees tend to have higher growth and so forth. So you throw all those things in, and then you tease out what's the impact of right to work. By itself, that's what I say on the slide, by itself, right to work boosts employment by roughly 0.5% a year. And that's a big boost over time. That's why I have this picture of the leafcutter ant. If you've ever seen these things are just amazing. First of all, they're creepy, but they're really cool because they're these tiny ants, and they're moving these leaves that probably weigh 4 or 5 times as much as they do. And that's really the power of that 0.5%, because it really, really grows over time. If you look over the space, if you have growth, that the difference of a 0.5 percentage point in growth over time is roughly, you gain an extra generation over the space of about 50 years. In other words, you've got an extra generation's worth of growth. So it's a really big impact. And so that 0.5%, and I guess I'm speaking more as as a policy dude than as an economist, because what you'll have in a lot of these discussions, someone will say, well, it'll boost employment by 0.5% a year. And you say, that's not much. It's worth it. It's worth it to sacrifice that small amount of growth in order to have more unionization. But remember, 0.5% is a huge amount, and it can really add up over time. As we're thinking, again, I'm an economist. I'm a terrible politician. I'll save the politics for the politicians. But one of the things that really gets missed when we talk about right to work is, as Billy Mays would say, but wait, there's more. It's all 100% free. If you think about all the policies that the legislature has enacted, not just in Washington, but in Oregon and across the United States, the policies that we've done to try to stimulate the economy tend to involve taking money from one group of people and handing it to another group of people so that they can go spend it. So in other words, it usually involves more spending. Enacting right to work is 100% free. You don't have to raise taxes a penny to enact right to work. You don't have to spend a single penny to get right to work in action. It's just a matter of signing legislation that says now employers and employees are free to negotiate among themselves what the employment agreement is without having the union insert itself in that arrangement. And again, one last thing that I should leave with, because I think I've got about a minute left, is you got to remember that a lot of times when you hear about people talking about right to work, the argument that you'll hear from the unions and the opponents of right to work is, well, it'll destroy the unions. Well, no, it's not anti-union. It's free choice. It's pro-choice. It allows you to make a choice to join the union. And as a wise man once said, with right to work, if you like your union, you can keep your union, period. And it doesn't stop the unions from existing. It doesn't stop them from recruiting members. But what it does do is it makes them be more competitive in recruiting members and make them offer services that would make people want to join the union rather than forcing them to join the union as a condition of employment. And so I think with that, I'm probably out of time, and I know we've got more interesting speakers after me, so thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fruits. So next we're going to hear from Senator Michael Baumgartner. Senator Baumgartner represents the 6th District in Spokane. He is the Vice Chair of the Senate Ways and Means Committee, and he serves on the Higher Education and Trade and Economic Development Committees. Senator Baumgartner is one of those lawmakers that he's been a staunch advocate for improving our state's small business climate, sponsoring legislation to reduce the regulatory burden and to force government to become more efficient and more responsive to the employers that drive our state's economy. This past legislative session, Senator Baumgartner sponsored a very controversial piece of legislation for some, and that would be SB 5935, and that is a bill to make Washington State a right-to-work state. And so today he's going to tell us a little bit more about his bill and why he believes right to work is important for improving, for making Washington State more competitive.
Don't be afraid to clap. No, it's fine. Well, thank you. Let me start by expressing my gratitude to everybody in this room and to Washington Policy Center. Since I've been in office, even before I got into office, I think Washington Policy Center is such an important organization for this state and continues to be so. And thank you for being part of it and for being here today. As I did in the other session, I also want to start with an apology. We turned this into a family trip, and my 2-year-old and my 1-year-old came with me with my wonderful wife, and it was a little noisy last night in the room around 3 to 5 a.m. So I'm sorry if you're in the room next to us. And on this subject, is right to work right for Washington? Well, I certainly intend to find out. I'd actually like to, I dropped a bill on it last year, and I'll give you the background on that in a second. But first, let's just take a little informal poll. All right, so the first question I have is raise your hand if you think Washington State should become a right-to-work state. All right, now raise your hand if you don't think Washington State should become a right-to-work state.
I don't think they want to admit it.
Well, for those of you, now let me ask you this. For those of you that raised your hand, how many of you think if you went down your block, you could explain the economic benefits and the personal freedom benefits of being a right-to-work state to your neighbors and get more than half of them to agree? If you think you could get more than half the people on your block to agree, All right, so we're still under roomed, so we got some work to do on this issue. Well, the background of it for last year is I've been wanting, right to work is one of the issues that I think is exceptionally important for our economy, and it's something I think is just a basic principle of American freedom. You know, America is built on this idea of liberty, this idea of choice, this idea that you should have the choice to join a union and pay their dues or not. I think that is essentially what makes us us, and it's sort of antithetical to the American system to be forced to do those sorts of things. But you know, it's tough politics in the state of Washington. So even though I wanted to drop a bill like this on my first week in the legislature back in 2011, you know, one of my political consultants and some of the folks in my own caucus said, "Oh God, you can't do that. You know, keep your head down, and you know, and you don't want to be their number one target on this issue." Well, this year when we were sitting and we were trying to get this very sort of important but kind of small ball, really in the grand scheme of things, reform passed with regards to workers' compensation. And it was really at loggerheads in the, it was really getting a lot of resistance. Something that under Governor Gregoire in 2011 we would have been able to get through, but this year was really reaching a tough time. And as we got into like the fifth special session and it all starts to blend together, Governor Inslee announced an aerospace strategy. And I read the thing and I just thought it was absolutely vapid. That there wasn't any real substance behind what we needed to do in the state to actually improve the business climate. And so I dropped a bill that was a right-to-work bill, and that was combined with either we improve the workers' compensation or we become a right-to-work state to try and enter in that discussion of helping workers' comp, but also trying to bring to light and finally put some sunshine on this issue. Now, dropping a right-to-work bill in the state of Washington is kind of like having a crying 3-year-old and 5-year-old in a hotel room at night. It doesn't make some folks very happy, and you tend to hear from them. And it's good that I've spent some time in Iraq and Afghanistan and actually met my wife in Afghanistan. Ellie's English, but we met over there. And as I always say on the campaign trail, if Baumgartner can find love in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, all things are possible. So keep hope alive. But I have certainly heard from folks who don't think right to work is a very good idea for the state, and they tend to be not very friendly about it. And I expect they'll continue to not be very friendly about it. But I do really think it is an important issue, and I think it is both a good policy issue, but I think it's also an aspirational issue. And I'm going to put on my pure Republican hat here just for a second, which is I think we need big ideas in this state, and I think we need big ideas that we can communicate to the man and woman on the street. And I think Right to Work provides that. On the political strategy aspect of it, if we're going to move this thing forward, you know, I look at one of my colleagues in the Senate, Ed Murray, who's from the other side of the aisle, but was very strategic in how he moved a big idea that was very important to him forward, which was the issue of marriage equality and gay marriage. You know, and Ed always talked about how he had to lose first before they won on the issue. But it was an issue they had introduced, discussed with the politics with people. And I think, in some sense, Right to Work on the political element can go the same way. You have to win with the facts, but you have to have those conversations and explain to people this basic idea of freedom. And I think at the end of the day, perhaps the aspect of individual freedom will be a more compelling argument than will be the overall economic benefit if we are to move this bill forward. So, you know, where we are right now is I would like to reintroduce the bill. You know, we have some folks who would not like to reintroduce the bill coming up to an election season. But I think it's important that we at least do a work session on it and have a discussion like this at the state legislature and continue to make the issues known. And look, if there, you know, this is how the American system of democracy works. If there's folks out there that make a compelling argument why it shouldn't happen, let's give them the floor to say that as well, too. But we shouldn't be afraid of the discussion in this state. And one of the analogies I was talking to someone the other day, it kind of builds a little bit on the previous speaker, is, you know, I spent a lot of my time overseas and frequently engage in, have been involved in some of our American counterinsurgency engagements in Iraq and Afghanistan, and have spent a lot of time in the Middle East. And one of the things I talk about to the religious and political argument there is, you know, and I talk with some of my Muslim friends, you know, we talk about the aspect that, you know, should there be compulsion in religion? Is that good for religion? Is that good for the individual? And as a proud Catholic and someone that is proud to be Catholic, you know, I recognize that it was not good for the Catholic Church or for the individual when everybody was forced to be Catholic, you know, back in the Middle Ages. And I think that when you have that choice, it actually makes an institution that has to service its members better. And I do think, if you look at the experience of Boeing in South Carolina, where I believe over half of their members voluntarily chose to join the union, my guess is that they're getting better service and feel better represented than the folks right now that are getting this vote forced upon them for the machinists coming up tomorrow, and we'll see what happens there. And the final thing I'll just close with is this, is that while Boeing is a big deal in this state and a great company and one that we all love and that has a huge impact, and we need to fight to keep those aerospace jobs here, right to work is about more than just Boeing in this state. It's about that future Boeing. It's about that kid in middle school, we're going through college right now with that great idea that wants Washington State to be the place where he wants to build his business and attract manufacturing and not drive those places out of seas. And so I think sometimes in Olympia, we concentrate so much on making policy, especially in this state, just for those folks who are here now. And you look at our B&O tax rate in this state, which is pretty high B&O tax rate, and then we provide cutouts for those folks that have the political muscle to get them. But it's real tough to have a startup in this state or to have a competitive growth of business in this state. And so we need to, I think, redirect business. And so I would ask you, when you leave here today, to let me know what you find out. Let's find out together whether right to work is right for the state of Washington. So try and explain it as best you can and with your neighbors down the street, and then send me an email at senatorbaumgartner.com is my official website. Michael at Vote Baumgartner is my campaign website, but you can do it on the Senator Baumgartner one. And let me know what you find out, and let me hear your ideas, that if this is the right idea and how it might be advanced. And if you're interested in this issue, because by golly, if it's ever going to go anywhere, it's going to take all of us that are interested in it, because the folks that are opposed to it are pretty strongly opposed. Please let me know, send me an email, and get involved, and we'll see what happens. But I, at very least, look forward to the discussion, because that's how it starts in our system here in Washington State. And I've been to more than 70 countries in the world, and I've actually lived in Michigan for a time, and it's a pretty nice place. The best place I've ever lived is in Washington State, and I'd really like to keep it that way. You think about the wonderful people, the innovative process we have here, our great nature, and I don't want to see what happened in Michigan happen in Washington State. I want us to maintain and grow our industrial base, and I think to do that, we need to preemptively look at some things like right to work. So thanks very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. I don't think Michigan wants to be like Michigan anymore, given that they just passed a right to work bill. So next we're going to hear from Scott Hamilton. Mr. Hamilton is the managing director of the Leeham Company, an aerospace consulting firm. He's organized aerospace conferences around the world, and he is routinely asked by media to provide input and analysis of policies and trends within the aerospace industry. So today, Mr. Hamilton's going to provide us with a little bit of his unique insight into how a right-to-work law would impact the aerospace industry. Senator Baumgartner's right, it is about more than Boeing, but given the conversation in the news right now, the right-to-work issue is especially germane with the latest developments with Boeing. So, Mr. Hamilton.
I don't know what's in the news these days. There's an advantage and a disadvantage to being the last person up on a panel. The disadvantage is these other guys have already talked about some of the things I wanted to talk about. The advantage is I can react to some of the things that they've said. And Eric had gone through a whole list of things about why the South is rising, right to work, lower wages, then lower cost of doing business, pro-growth businesses. I disagree. It all comes down to two words: air conditioning.
No.
That's why the South has risen.
Probably a big part of it.
And he mentioned that he's from Portland, doesn't have marijuana down there yet. Instead of talking about right to work, maybe we ought to be talking about right to grow.
Right? Yeah. Well, I'm sure there would be a lot of people who want to talk about that.
Yeah. I was actually asked to take a look, of course, at the aerospace impact, and obviously Boeing is the big dog here in Washington in aerospace. And I've been advocating Washington should become a right-to-work state for quite some time, and my friends in the IAM, and I actually do have some friends over at the IAM, and SPIA, Boeing's Engineers Union, have really given me a real earache about my position. And in fact, one of my good friends over at SPIA called it creepy that I wanted to see Washington become right to work, and the IAM calls it right to worse. So I'm going to address a little bit of both of that. But here, in a nutshell, is, I think, encapsulates the challenge that Washington has, particularly as it relates to Boeing. There are now 24 states that are right to work, and those are in green. And I highlighted South Carolina, Texas. I should add Utah to that. And Boeing has, of course, the big facility for the 787 down in South Carolina. It has in San Antonio, Texas, a facility that they do some finishing work for the 787. They do maintenance work on the U.S. Air Force tankers. And in Utah, they have some work down in Utah, some facilities down there. And between the time that I turned this presentation over to the Washington Policy Center for this event today, and now I learned that Utah, in fact, has, I am told, presented a proposal to Boeing to build the 777X in Utah. That is not public. It's Boeing certainly hasn't announced it, but I'm told on pretty good authority that that is the case. I have a broad outline what some of the plans are, but when Boeing says that if the IAM tomorrow does not vote to accept this contract, that it will put the 777X assembly out for bid. The presumption is that it would be South Carolina, and that would be my favorite, but Texas and Utah are also potentials, and those are right-to-work states. Now, Boeing uses right-to-work as a hammer every time we turn around now. When Boeing went to build the 737 MAX, which is the successor to the current airplane that they're building in Renton right now, they said, well, we'll take it out to right-to-work state if you don't agree. Boeing just has this real contentious relationship with the IAM. The IAM is the touch labor union. They actually build the airplanes in Renton. They actually build the airplanes in Everett. And in 2008, when they were getting ready to strike for 57 days, they boasted of Washington as the fourth most unionized state in the nation. And I still don't know, well, I do understand it, but I thought it was really rather odd that Governor Gregoire showed up at a union rally to support the union and possibly striking the biggest company in our state. I mean, what kind of a message did that send to Chicago, headquarters of Boeing? And that's another thing that has got Boeing, kind of mad at the state of Washington. The Washington Department of Commerce, and I was a consultant to the Commerce Department for 18 months, cited the union presence and the union dominance here in Washington state as one of the reasons that other aerospace companies located in right-to-work states. Rolls-Royce had actually looked at putting their engine manufacturing here to support the 787. Well, instead they wound up putting it in Virginia. There were some other companies as well that cited the union presence in Washington and the union labor laws as a deterrent. Now, what would be some of the advantages, of course, for companies in a right-to-work state? You do get some lower labor costs, or are lower benefit costs, more flexible work rules, and more management flexibility. What the union will come back and say, well, this means you're going to have lower family wages, worse benefits, and they will point to the current contract contract vote as an example of worse benefits. The unions will claim that the employer can run roughshod over workers in work rules and that sort of thing. The unions will claim that there are lower state revenue income levels. In other words, the state takes in less income from worker taxes. And they will also say that there is poor school funding in right-to-work states. Now, they sort of ignore the fact that I think it was the last session of the legislature, and Senator, you can probably verify my recollection on this. Washington is like the 43rd worst funded state for education in the country, and yet we're the 4th most unionized state. So I'm not sure that the union argument on that one really holds up very well. So what should Washington do? Well, Senator Baumgartner already mentioned this. You should engage in a conversation, and I think you should commission an independent study from a neutral third party. And I had never met Eric before, so I'm not advertising for him.
I am.
Get it from a neutral, not somebody that the unions hire, not somebody that the companies hire, somebody that the state would actually hire to give a neutral look at all of the pros and cons, so that you're not seeking the answers that you want, but you get answers that really mean something. And I think you need to consider right to work as a package of business climate reforms, because Representative Bruce Chandler from Yakima says that right to work alone isn't going to achieve much. He was a participant at a legislative lunch at the Pacific Northwest Aerospace Alliance put on in Bellevue. Senator Baumgartner was at the similar format 2 days later in Spokane, and at the Bellevue conference, Representative Chandler said that right to work isn't going to do much. Now, here's a Republican. You would think that he would just naturally support right to work, but he was kind of thinking, well, what's the point if you don't do it wrap it in with a whole bunch of other stuff. So one of the other things that I was going to talk about, which was mentioned by Eric, is that a right-to-work state doesn't mean that you can't have unions. Texas, for example, American Airlines and Southwest Airlines are headquartered in Texas. Continental Airlines, before it merged with United, it was headquartered in Houston. All three of them were heavily unionized. Southwest Airlines is 85% unionized. The issue is, from that perspective, is not whether you have a union. It's a perspective of whether the management and the union can actually get along. And Boeing has a history of not getting along with the IAM, or vice versa, depending on your point of view. So I think we do need to have this conversation. With respect to the smaller businesses, we have, according to some figures, we have 1,200 companies in one way or another in this state that supply the aerospace supply chain. And of course, Boeing employs about 85,000 people out of the 110,000 people in aerospace in this state. Esterline recently became a union shop with the IAM, the same local that represents Boeing. But Esterline is as far as they know, is the only company in the state where union membership is voluntary because of the contract that they actually negotiated with the IAM. Very unusual circumstance, and I don't know all the details, but that's just an example. So I think we're ready for Q&A here.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. And with that, I see a hand up already. So we'll start the Q&A. Yes, ma'am.
I love the point on the PowerPoint, and this is maybe for Mr. Hamilton and Dr. Cruz. Lots of assertions. Let's see the data. Even Representative Chandler, with all due respect, that's a nice assertion. Where's his data to back it up?
Well, that's exactly the point here, is that you need to have the data to back up. You're talking about implementing the right to work or not implementing it.
In my doctoral program, and Dr. Cruz, tell me if I'm wrong, I was taught very early on by senior faculty, which was very humbling, that something without data to back it up, especially if it's good data that's been reviewed, is an opinion.
Well, and that's why why I did our analysis for Oregon, which we crafted to be that we could take it and apply it to any state. Our data covers, my employment data goes all the way back to 1919 and all 50 states. And so what we were trying to do with our study, a lot of the other studies that have been done out there look at kind of a snapshot in time. They do what's known as a cross-section. They'll say, okay, we'll just look at across all 50 states who has better employment growth. And so what we wanted to do was take a look over a long period of time. Yeah, long period of time does a couple of things. One is it gives you a lot more observations, but the other thing it does is that since we go all the way back to 1947, we also have a period of time when no states were right to work, and then we can also adjust and see how employment changes as states go from non-right to work to right to work. There was only one state that went the other way, and believe it or not, that was Indiana. Because Indiana went right to work 2 years ago, but it also went right to work for 1 year back in the 60s and switched back. Very long and sordid story, but.
And let me just say, the question wasn't for me. I'm going to jump in here. I have a background in development economics. In the colleague here's comment on correlation versus causation is very important. All this, and you're exactly right on the that good policy should be founded in data. One of the things I'm being really interested to see is to see what happens in Michigan now, and then also track metrics that aren't specifically related to employment, things like innovation and building a knowledge-based economy, and look at things like patent production in right-to-work states, because the main argument against this, of course, is that it's a race to the bottom, and I actually think it can be a race to the top because you're going to free up more flexibility and more innovation, on these points if you do that, and we need to track and look. If we're wrong, we're wrong, but let's have that discussion and try it out.
One of the other issues, too, that I think is becoming a bigger and bigger deal is this whole idea of income inequality, which economically speaking, I don't think has much to do with economic development, but it's becoming more and more of an issue, especially ever since the Occupy movement. And, one of the things I've discovered, I just blogged about a month ago, is that states that have greater employment growth have actually seen smaller changes in income inequality. In other words, across the United States, income inequality has gotten worse, but the states that had faster employment growth have had smaller increases in income inequality. And so one of the follow-up studies I've been thinking about doing is to track income inequality in right-to-work versus non-right-to-work states, because now my suspicion is that you may actually see improving or not as worsening income inequality in right-to-work states. I don't know if that's true, but I think that may be an interesting way to, because one of the arguments, I know some people call it right to worse. A lot of the unions call right to work for less. The idea that somehow or another everyone gets a pay cut when they, when they go to right to work. I think one of the things they're missing, though, is the first question you should ask when someone says, well, you get paid less if you don't join a union. Do you say, is that before or after you pay your union dues? Because, I pay my union dues, and so it's a whopping $70 worse off. But so I'm not going to complain too much about how much I pay to the union, which is why I haven't done opted out. Anyway.
Yeah. Yes, I'm sorry. The question was whether there was any data to back up, or I guess reinforcing the need for data to back up some of the assertions that have been made about right to work on both sides of the argument, that it would help Washington State or hurt Washington State.
And the other thing, too, is just real quick, that right to work has actually probably been one of the most researched issues in economics because it's a very simple thing to measure. It's either a state is right to work or not right to work. And so it's kind of fun for economists to study that because it's such an easy thing to observe.
The topic for this session is right to work, but we have to recognize that right to work is only a part of the package, and that's really what Bruce Chandler was trying to get across. Boeing is moving jobs out of the state not only because of work issues, right to work states, but also because of the environmental issues, the permitting issues. When Boeing moved Line 2 down for the 787 down to South Carolina, they were able to get a building up and constructed, approved, all the permitting, all of that stuff in 18 months. Here in this state, we're lucky, facetiously speaking, if we can get a permit in 18 years.
I'm sorry, I can't help this. When Boeing moved its headquarters to Illinois, the fact that former Governor Gregoire was hanging out at a union rally, maybe Boeing wants to vote for them.
Funny you should mention that. That's a theory that's going out there that. Yeah, teleprompter. What she said was that maybe Boeing wants the vote to fail. There is, in fact, a theory out there that number one, Boeing did not expect Washington to step up and provide incentives, and certainly not on the level that it did, and so that was a real surprise. And then that would give them the ability to put the 777X elsewhere and blame the state of Washington. The second part of that theory is that if the union vote fails, then they can go ahead and put the 777X elsewhere, and then they can blame the union and deflect all of the criticism to the company. Interesting theory. I have no idea if there's anything to that.
Yes, sir.
You talked about getting an independent contractor, not hired by industry or so forth, but hired by the state to build these metrics so that we really see what we're dealing with. And my immediate thought was, if the state is in charge of putting out the RFP, how independent are they really going to be? Senator Baumgartner, you're laughing at that, but that, to me, that's very real, because there is influence on that.
Can I just take a moment and repeat sort of, I'm not sure if it was a question or a statement, but a little bit of both maybe, about whether the calls for an independent study of the benefits or not of right to work that should or should not be commissioned by the state, how independent that would really be, I guess implying that the state has a vested interest in keeping Washington a not right to work state. So Senator Baumgartner?
Well, you make a good point. I think that's why we have things like think tanks. We have independent academics. We do have an independent body within the legislature that can look at these things. I don't think the data is really in dispute on economic growth opportunities. I think the politics are, very much so. And, what we're essentially talking about here is a lot of forced union donations that go directly into political campaigns that keep some folks in office. And so, that is a big thing that would be a big thing to change. One of the things that's happened in the state of Washington now is we're increasingly seeing big issues taken straight to the ballot and people having an ability to weigh on them directly. So I would like the public to be as educated and have the conversation as much as possible on all this, but I think you're right to be hesitant about whether – I wouldn't expect the Department of Commerce, current Department of Commerce is going to jump on top of this issue.
In Oregon, even the attorneys in our Department of Justice are unionized. I don't understand why a group of people with advanced degrees need to be a member of the union. I have a PhD in economics. I don't know why I need the protection of the American Federation of Teachers to keep my wages low. And it's true, because they do keep our wages. I mean, a lot of times you think about it boosting wages, but what they've done is they've negotiated with the university where every adjunct, no matter whether you teach economics or business or underwater basket weaving, you get paid the same amount per credit no matter what you do. I teach in the business school. I'm sure I can negotiate a higher wage. I just love teaching, and I do it for the children. But I think there are some clear cases where the union negotiations actually do keep wages down for some people.
Senator Baumgartner's comment that he didn't think the Department of Commerce would jump right on this is spot on. Shortly after I made a call for right to work, the Puget Sound Business Journal asked Governor Inslee, should we have that conversation? And Inslee just dismissed it out of hand. I don't know if there's some, since the Republicans control the Senate with the coalition majority, I don't know if the Republican or if the Senate could commission it. The democratically controlled House could commission theirs, or the Department of Commerce. But we aren't even having the conversation in Olympia.
One of the ways I think we should look at the conversation is, and I'll put on my vice chair of Ways and Means hat, at the moment is, why, from a state budget standpoint, why do we care about economic growth and jobs growth? We want to generate revenue so we can pay for all that great education, so we can pay for that public safety, so we can pay for those good roads. All that stuff works better if we have a more competitive economy. So to me, right to work isn't just an issue of labor and management. It's not just an issue of jobs growth. It's really an education of school funding. It's an issue of being able to fund those social services. And I think that, if you think about it in that big picture sense, it helps as well, too. And if you compound 1% more manufacturing growth in the state of Washington for the next 20 years, that's a heck of a lot more kids getting all-day kindergarten or getting, K through 3 class size reductions or getting, that help for a handout when they're down. And you have to think about it in that grand context as well. And maybe we can find some space with some of our colleagues across South and Governor Inslee as we're having that discussion in 2015, if they're putting forward ideas like, returning to a state or having a state income tax and these sorts of things, that we should enter in what we can do on the jobs growth side of things to fund that spending.
In Oregon, right now, there's a measure called IP9, which would not do a statewide right to work, but only provide right to work for government employees. And it's kind of funny because the governor, of course, is really upset about this, and he gave some talk about, how we need these union protections because who else is going to protect the workers from the terrible management that could ride roughshod over them. And someone had to remind them, well, remember, these are state employees. You're their manager and you're their boss, so they need protection from you. So I think he put down those talking points and has moved on to something else.
We have a few.
But that might be a way to kind of get the nose in the tent, so to speak, is to maybe focus first on the public sector, because I think it's a lot harder to defend unionization in the public sector, because what do they need to be protected against? In the evil legislature and the evil governor and all those other people, right? Well, probably the Republicans, right?
So we have a few more minutes, and I'm going to, yes, sir.
My question is rhetorical, but it's how is right to work, right for Washington even a question? When you give unions this power to control everyone in an industry, you put the worker in a position where he can't hold the union accountable by doing anything other than quitting his job. And that obviously puts the unions in a place of power where they can do whatever they want as long as they don't do something that costs that worker their job. So they're not going to change, so they're going to become this huge entity that's, well, basically what the federal government itself has become. And it's going to, by definition, slow growth. I don't see how anyone can look at this from even a philosophical standpoint and say that this is a wrong thing to do, that this couldn't be, I don't understand how it couldn't be constitutional, or how it could be constitutional to have unions with this power.
Can I just repeat that? Sure. We have them recording, and I don't think they can hear these questions. And the question/statement that was made was, how is right to work, or how could right to work not be right for Washington State? And the gentleman just made a few points that how could giving workers the choice to join a union and have that make that decision voluntarily, how could that possibly be bad, or what argument could you possibly make against that?
I think it's important as we have this discussion that we do recognize some of the good things that unions do and some of the worker protection they provide and some of the egregious treatment of workers that has happened in America in the early part of the last century and ongoing. And, I don't think we'll, to as much as possible, even though immediately in this conversation, folks start demonizing either side. I think it really is important to have a balanced conversation and say, yeah, there's a lot of good stuff that organized labor has done. But I think we need to think about that as being voluntary, think about the additional jobs growth we get and all these other issues that we've talked about in that fundamental freedom. So hopefully, as this goes forward and we take this up in the legislature and you take it up in those conversations you're going to have on with your neighbors and then get back to me on it, we do so in a balanced way that does recognize those good things. Because I think at the end of the day, it'll make our argument much stronger.
And I'm going to put on my union hat, and I'm going to tell you what I would say why maybe right to work would not be right. And the argument goes like this. It says that the union does a lot of fantastic things for people. They negotiate wages and workplace rules and so forth. And that those protections and those negotiations are an umbrella over all employees, and whether you're in the union or not. And so therefore, you have this problem of what's known as free riding. And so the only way to deal with the free riders is to force them to pay the union dues. That will be the number one argument on why you don't have right to work. There's a huge fallacy with that argument because they act like it is their obligation to negotiate on behalf of everyone whether or not they pay dues. In most states, in almost every state where you have even forced unionization, there is no requirement for the union to negotiate on behalf of non-union members. That is an obligation that they have taken upon themselves to say, look at all the wonderful things we're doing for you, and therefore you have to pay us. And so I put on my union hat and then I took it off.
Well, I think just to expand on that, where unions are coming from or their mindset, one union actually said in a right-to-work state, I forget which one, but this was last year, and they complained that forcing union workers to work alongside non-union workers, whereby they were being, the union was benefiting all of the workers, but only one was paying into. They actually said it was akin to slavery. And I think that's sort of, it's shocking that they would make that connection, but those were their exact words, and I actually blogged about it because it was such an outlandish thing to say. But I think it kind of goes to the mindset of labor unions and where they're coming from and sort of what a visceral emotional issue this is for labor unions, all reasoning aside. And with that, I believe we are out of time. And I want to thank everyone for attending our Right to Work Small Business Panel. I want to thank Dr. Eric Fruits, Senator Baumgartner, and Mr. Scott Hamilton for joining us today. I think they gave us some excellent presentations and information.